My name is Sarah. I am 32 years old, and I was standing in the dimly lit office of the man who had ruined my life, holding the flash drive with the financial records that would send him to federal prison. The bitter revenge I had craved for agonizing months was finally in my hand. I was ready to press send on the email to the board of directors, exposing how he framed me for his embezzlement. But as my trembling finger hovered over the computer mouse, my eyes drifted to a child's crayon drawing resting near his keyboard. It depicted a little girl holding hands with a man, with the words, "Daddy is my hero. He is going to fix my heart," scrawled clumsily across the top. The emotional weight of those innocent words hit my chest like a physical blow, freezing my blood and making me question everything I thought I knew about the monster who destroyed my career. I stared at the paper, realizing the decision I was about to make would not just destroy a corrupt boss, but would shatter a fragile world I never knew existed, leaving me standing at the edge of a terrifying precipice with absolutely no idea how to step back. Before I dive deep into this chaotic journey of betrayal and the absolute hardest choice I have ever had to make, I want to take a quick pause to ask you something. I always wonder where my stories travel to and who is listening, so please let me know in the comments which city and state you are listening from right now. Now, to make you truly understand how I ended up standing in that dark executive office with my finger hovering over the nuclear option, I need to take you back to where this nightmare originally began. It was about 8 months ago, during the absolute busiest season our corporate logistics company had ever seen. I was giving absolutely everything I had to my job, willingly sacrificing my personal life, my sleep, and my sanity, all because I foolishly believed that hard work and loyalty would eventually be rewarded. I had absolutely no idea that my blind dedication was simply painting a giant target on my back for someone else to exploit and destroy. I was working as the senior operations manager, essentially running around putting out fires every single day. My immediate superior was Richard, a 58-year-old executive who had been with the firm for over 2 decades. Richard commanded the room the second he walked in. I deeply admired him as a mentor and a guide in a cutthroat industry. He would often call me into his spacious office, offer me premium coffee, and tell me how much he relied on my expertise to keep the department afloat. I drank it all in, eager for his validation, completely unaware that he was carefully setting me up to be the perfect scapegoat for a colossal financial disaster he was secretly brewing behind closed doors. My closest ally in that stressful concrete jungle was my coworker and best friend Emily, who was 33 years old. Emily was the lead accountant for our division, and she had a mind like a steel trap when it came to budgets. Emily was always the cynical one. She would constantly warn me that Richard was too smooth and that people who never seemed to make any mistakes were usually incredibly good at hiding them. I laughed off her concerns, calling her paranoid. I told her that Richard had just promised me a major promotion and that everything was going to pay off. Emily would just shake her head, her eyes filled with a quiet worry that I completely ignored. A mistake that would soon cost me my entire career and thrust me into a deep, agonizing depression. The sudden and brutal collapse of my world happened on a random Tuesday morning. I was called into the main executive conference room, expecting a routine strategy meeting. Instead, I walked in and found Richard sitting quietly at the head of the long oak table, flanked by human resources and the company's external legal counsel. Richard would not even look me in the eye. The HR director pushed a thick manila folder across the polished wood toward me. Without any warning, they accused me of gross negligence and systematic mismanagement of vendor funds, claiming that over $400,000 had been illegally funneled into unapproved offshore accounts under my direct electronic authorization. I felt the blood completely drain from my face as my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my dry throat. I opened the folder with violently trembling hands, staring in absolute horror at copies of purchase orders and massive money transfer approvals. My digital signature was stamped clearly on every single one of them. I looked up at Richard, pleading silently with him to intervene, to tell these people that there was a massive misunderstanding. But Richard just sat there, his expression cold and detached, playing the part of the deeply disappointed mentor to absolute perfection. He calmly told HR that he had suspected financial irregularities for weeks, but was personally heartbroken to finally discover that it was me behind the theft. I was terminated on the spot without any chance to defend myself. They deactivated my security badge and had a uniformed security guard escort me out of the building. The agonizing weeks that followed were undeniably the darkest period of my entire life. I isolated myself in my small apartment, ignoring calls from concerned family members. The rumor mill in our logistics industry was vicious, and the toxic whisper network had already branded me as a corporate thief. Absolutely no one would hire me. I would wake up drenched in cold sweat, replaying that horrific HR meeting over and over in my head. The sheer injustice of it all slowly began to curdle into a deep, toxic anger in my chest. I knew for a fact that I had not stolen a single dime. I knew those digital signatures were applied using the executive override system, a highly restricted network that Richard controlled. He had cowardly framed me to save himself. One rainy evening, as I sat exhausted on my living room floor, I heard a quiet knock on my door. It was Emily. She sat down across from me and told me that things at the corporate office were getting progressively worse. The unpaid vendors were actively threatening lawsuits, and Richard was smoothly pushing all the blame onto the toxic legacy of my supposed financial mismanagement. Emily looked me dead in the eye and tearfully admitted that she could not sleep at night knowing what they did to me. She told me she had noticed strange discrepancies in the hidden administrative ledger right before I was fired, but she was too terrified of losing her own job to speak up. Hearing her say those words out loud sparked something fierce inside me. The crushing depression vanished instantly, replaced by a white-hot determination to fight back and expose him. I begged Emily to help me expose the truth. I desperately needed the raw network server logs, the hidden metadata of those fraudulent approvals, to definitively prove that the digital signature was applied directly from Richard's private terminal. Emily was absolutely terrified. She told me that if the IT department caught her accessing those highly restricted archives, she would face criminal charges. After a long, agonizing silence, she finally agreed. For the next 3 agonizing weeks, my messy living room turned into a makeshift command center. Emily would sneak physical printouts and heavily encrypted flash drives to me during rushed, secretive meetings at loud local coffee shops. We were risking everything, but the burning desire for justice pushed us forward every single day. I spent 20 exhausting hours a day cross-referencing complex timestamps, tracking IP addresses, and matching vendor account details to public banking records. I aggressively traced the unapproved vendor accounts to a complicated series of anonymous shell companies registered in Delaware. From there, I managed to find obscure public business registries directly linking those specific shell companies to a private wealth management firm that Richard used for his personal estate. It was a meticulously planned corporate embezzlement scheme. He had been quietly siphoning off $50,000 a month for nearly an entire year. I finally had all the definitive proof in my hands. I had the server logs showing his IP address applying my signature. I compiled everything into a massive digital dossier. The feeling of impending justice was intoxicating, but I did not just want to send an anonymous email from the quiet safety of my apartment. I wanted to see his face when his world collapsed. I wanted him to fully understand that I was the one who took him down. Emily told me that Richard was hosting a major after-hour strategy session on a Friday night, and the executive floor would be mostly empty. She bravely slipped me a temporary guest badge she had managed to swipe from the lobby security desk. My plan was simple but devastating. I was going to sneak into his private office, leave a physical copy of the dossier right on his desk with a handwritten note, and hit send on the email to the authorities the exact moment I walked out of the building. I wanted that ultimate psychological victory. My hands were shaking, my mouth was dry, but I walked straight ahead into the darkness. The executive office was exactly as I remembered it. I closed the heavy oak door quietly behind me and walked straight over to his massive mahogany desk. I placed the thick manila envelope containing his absolute ruin right in the center of his leather blotter. I pulled out my cell phone, opening the saved draft of the email that was addressed to the board of directors in the local police department. All I had to do was press one single button to end his entire career and send him to prison. My thumb hovered nervously over the glowing screen. I took a deep, shaky breath, savoring the intense moment, feeling the sweet vindication coursing through my veins. But as I looked down at the desk to make sure the envelope was perfectly aligned, my eyes caught sight of a bright piece of paper. I reached out hesitantly and pulled the paper free from under the keyboard. It was a drawing done in cheap, colorful crayon. It showed a tall stick figure holding hands with a much smaller stick figure wearing what looked like a hospital gown. Above the crude figures, written in the shaky, uneven handwriting of a very young child, were the words, "Daddy is my hero. He is going to fix my heart." I flipped the paper over with trembling fingers. It was an urgent reminder for a pediatric cardiology consultation at the most expensive and exclusive children's hospital in the state. The patient's name was Lily, aged 8, Richard's daughter. I stood there, completely frozen in shock. The air seemed to violently get sucked out of the room. I never knew she was sick. I never knew she had a failing heart that required massive medical intervention. My exhausted mind started racing out of control, desperately trying to process this devastating new information. The timeline of the massive embezzlement suddenly took on a sickening, tragic new context. It absolutely did not excuse what he did to me. He had still callously destroyed my life to save his own family. But the simple black and white narrative of my righteous revenge suddenly shattered into a million complicated shades of gray. If I pressed send on that email right now, Richard would be arrested tonight. His bank accounts and assets would immediately frozen. And little Lily. Lily would lose her father, her premium health insurance, and the stolen money funding the surgery that was supposed to save her life. I was holding a little girl's entire world in my trembling hand. I started to cry right there in the middle of his office. I wanted to be utterly ruthless. I wanted to be the strong, uncompromising woman who demanded absolute justice for the wrongs committed against her. He deserved to burn for what he did. But then I looked down again at the word hero scrawled in bright red crayon. Could I really be the person who took a dying child's hero away? Could I ever sleep peacefully at night knowing my vindication came at the direct cost of an 8-year-old girl's life? The brutal conflict tore at my soul. Reason screamed at me to press send. Emotion, empathy, and a deep, agonizing human pity begged me to stop. I stood in that silent office for what felt like an eternity, the phone incredibly heavy in my sweating hand. I finally realized I could not do it. I could not be the executioner of an innocent child's future, no matter how much the father deserved the blade of justice. But I also absolutely refused to be the silent victim anymore. I needed to clear my name and get my life back. I wiped my face, put my phone back in my pocket, and picked up the thick manila envelope from the desk. I walked over to the leather sofa hidden in the dark corner, sat down in the shadows, and waited. I waited for over an hour in dead silence. Finally, I heard the heavy door click open. Richard walked in, looking incredibly exhausted, aggressively rubbing his temples. The color instantly drained from his face. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. He took a terrified step back. I did not yell. I just calmly held up the damning envelope. I looked at him and told him that I knew absolutely everything. I told him about the Delaware shell companies, the hidden server logs, and the forged digital signatures he used to frame me. I spoke in a cold, flat, unwavering voice that seemed to terrify him far more than if I had been screaming. He tried to frantically deny it at first, stammering pathetic lies, but I sharply cut him off. I tossed the heavy envelope onto the glass coffee table between us. I watched intently as he opened it, his panicked eyes scanning the documents, his shoulders slumping heavily as the crushing reality of his complete exposure washed over him. He looked incredibly old, broken, and pathetic. He whispered that he was deeply sorry, that he was desperate. I did not let him finish. I pulled out the crayon drawing and placed it gently on the glass table. Richard looked down at his daughter's drawing, and a strangled, agonizing sob escaped his throat. I looked him dead in the eye and told him that my finger had been hovering over the button to send him straight to federal prison. I told him that I did not care about him or his ruined career, but I cared about Lily. Richard was openly weeping now, begging me not to take him away from his daughter, pleading frantically that she desperately needed the heart surgery next month to survive. I coldly told him I was not going to destroy his family, but he was going to fix what he broke. I laid out my absolute terms. He would immediately resign from the company, citing personal family health reasons. He would draft a legally binding letter completely exonerating me and admitting a massive system error falsely implicated me. But that was not the end of my demands. I explicitly ordered that he take a massive private loan against his personal estate to quietly pay back every single cent he stole from the company before the external auditors found the missing funds. He would have to live with the crippling financial debt for the rest of his life, but he would stay out of prison, and most importantly, he would keep his health insurance for Lily. Richard nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face, thanking me over and over again for my mercy. I felt deeply disgusted by his gratitude. I stood up, looked down at the pathetic man who had nearly ruined my life, and told him to never speak my name again. I walked out of the office, out of the building, and stepped out into the cool night air. I had gotten my peace and my life back. Richard actually kept his word. 2 days later, a company-wide email announced his sudden resignation to care for his sick daughter. A few hours after that, I received a formal, legally binding letter from Human Resources, officially retracting my termination, clearing my name of all wrongdoing, and offering me my job back with a substantial raise to avoid a wrongful lawsuit. I immediately declined the job offer. I could never work in that toxic environment again. But the complete exoneration letter was exactly what I needed. With my professional reputation fully restored, I easily landed a much better position as a regional director at a rival logistics firm. Emily eventually took over Richard's vacant role. Looking back on that intense night in his office, I realized that the line between righteous justice and terrible cruelty is sometimes painfully thin. I had every right in the world to completely destroy Richard, to expose him to the public and watch him fall from grace. But revenge, I ultimately learned, is a toxic poison you drink while hoping the other person dies. By choosing empathy and mercy over pure vengeance, I did not just save a little girl's father. I saved my own humanity. I saved myself from becoming just as cold, calculating, and ruthless as the man who betrayed me. I still think about Lily's colorful crayon drawing sometimes, and I truly hope she got her surgery. I hope her fragile heart was fixed, and I hope she never learns how incredibly close her hero came to losing absolutely everything. What about you? If you were holding the solid evidence to destroy the person who ruined your life, but it meant destroying an innocent child's world, would you do the same in my place? Until the next story.